This is the Fantasy Football Unlimited podcast with your host, Kevin Murray.
Welcome into the Fantasy Football Unlimited podcast. On this episode, we have a really special guest. You may know him as host of one of the most popular fantasy football podcasts on the entire planet. Author of the groundbreaking ebook, Late Round Quarterback, former editor-in-chief of Number Fire and FanDuel, co-host of the Living the Stream podcast with Denny Carter, girl dad, and founder of Late Round Fantasy Football. JJ Zachariason, great to have you on.
Thanks for having me, man. It's great to talk to you. I haven't been able to chat with you in a bit.
Yeah, no, I love having you on. I'm excited. Now, this JJ is a safe space. So if you want to talk about all the everything that goes into your projection models, all the data, all the ways that you formulate things, just feel free. It's you're totally good here.
Sounds good. Man.
So, no, but your rise in the fantasy football industry has been such a joy to witness. So many people just absolutely love your content. The value packed, quick hitting, data driven analysis. It's just such a easily consumable product, and it's communicated in such a great way. So
I appreciate that. It means a lot.
There's a reason why everyone dials into that podcast. It's special. So now you have a background with marketing, advertising, graphic design, and that's clearly helped you along the way with your brand and everything. And it kind of helps to it's kind of where the journey began when it comes to your decision to get into the industry. So unfulfilled with your career, coming out of college, what was it that you were thinking? What was going through your mind when you decided to pull up that Word document and start, typing something about something you were very passionate about?
Yeah, I mean, I think that people sort of find themselves in that situation pretty frequently where you're at work, whether you're 40 years old or I was like 22, 23 years old. I was pretty young. And you sit there and you say, I don't know if I can do what I'm doing for the rest of my life. Like, you just have this sort of existential type moment, in your mind. And I had that moment. I fortunately had that moment, earlier than later, just because I was able to really do some crazy things and take some crazy risks in my 20s where, there's not that much of an opportunity cost, if you will, in doing those things. But when I graduated from school, I got my degree in marketing and had this like graphic design background that was self-taught. I just did it throughout high school and stuff and in college. And so I got into advertising, and I loved the place that I was working at, in Cincinnati, Ohio. I mean, great people and all that, but I just wasn't fulfilled with what I was doing. So one day, you mentioned it, one day I opened up a Word document and I said to myself, I'm just going to list the things that I'm passionate about. And one of the things that I was passionate about was fantasy football. And then I started to research sort of the industry and what was going on from the perspective of like being an analyst, which was never really something that I thought I could do or was a thing. And so I just started researching more and more and realizing that, hey, what if I publish something and put something out into the universe and, felt vulnerable in that way, but put something out there just to see what would happen. And, the rest is history.
Did you get much pushback initially? Because I mean, obviously, your presence in the industry wasn't there. Did you get a lot of pushback initially, or were you just really accepted by the community right away?
Yeah, I mean, I would say that the pushback that I got was more so, I mean, friends and family were all like, sure, go for it, whatever. Like, I used to always be the person who like would try really random things and like build, like I could build websites back in the day, right? And this is before like even WordPress was really popular and platforms like that where it became very, very easy to put a website up there, or like a Squarespace or something. And so, back then, like you had to actually build these sites. So I used to come up with these like really random ideas all the time with these hopes of like going viral or something working out and happening, and me like being able to do that thing, at least as like a side hustle or something. And they never worked out. I mean, they were very, very dumb ideas, especially in hindsight. They were just kind of fun little things. But finally I tried this, and people that, my friends and family, they're like, yeah, sure. It's probably just another one of those things that he's just like trying out and seeing. I was doing like building like affiliate websites and stuff like that, trying to see if I could go down that route. I just wasn't very good at it. And then I just did this, and I think the pushback was more so from like some like random coworkers and stuff. They're like, what are you doing? You know, like what? Because they don't realize that there's like this space that it exists, that this industry exists, and that there's so much money to be made within the space. And then, yeah, I mean, like once I published what I published, you know, you're naturally going to get some pushback from people because no one knows who you are. And you have to, I don't want to say prove yourself, but you want to, you know, show that you know what you're talking about. And back then, again, I was in my like mid 20s, early-ish 20s. I was like 23, 24 years old. And so, you know, you're not as mature in the way that you sort of handle things on social media. So like, I remember going back and like getting in arguments with people all the time about like Rashad Jennings and stuff, like just things that are so inconsequential. But I'm this like, you know, I'm living with my girlfriend who's now my wife, and you know, we're just hanging out, and like I have nothing better to do but to go out on the weekends and get drunk with friends and all that stuff. And I'm like, yeah, sure, I'll just sit on Twitter all day on Saturday and just argue with people about Rashad. Why not? I mean, it's just sort of like this like prove it period, which I think was probably in my head more than you know, I actually needed to act that way and be that way. But you know, slowly but surely, you just kind of make connections and you show people who you are, and you're able to sort of grow your audience and your readership and such.
That's awesome. That's awesome. So when did you first even discover fantasy football? When was the first time you heard about it? When did you first get into a league? Yeah.
So I started playing back in 2002. So I was like a 9th grader at the time. And actually that league is the league that I commish still to this day. It's the home league that we still do. So I started back in 2002. So it's been over 20 years that I've been playing, and I was always the one in the league, which is, I feel like this is the way that many analysts start, is that you're the one in the league that takes it more seriously than everyone. Or, you know, I was the commish, and I was, you know, getting in arguments with people about trades and stuff like that. Cause you know, we're teenagers that are playing this game. It's fairly new, and there's not a lot of resources out there to really see what's accepted and what's normal. And like, is this, you know, now you can just plug in players into a trade calculator and say, this is fair. That kind of stuff didn't exist back then. So, you know, a lot of banter and like the message board and stuff. And, so yeah, I got started though, you know, a couple decades ago at this point.
That's awesome. That's great. That's great. And that's a great way to get started with that passion for the league experience, and let that kind of drive you to what you have created. It's incredible. So we're now in year 2 now of late round fantasy football. You chose to go out on your own, step out on your own. And how's that venture working for you? How's everything going with that?
It's great. It's great. You know, it's better than anticipated and expected. You know, I know a lot of people like saw that I was leaving FanDuel and they thought that there was like some bad blood or something like that. It's not the case at all. I mean, FanDuel is a fantastic place for folks to get a job and to work. And if not for the opportunity that I had, you know, I really, my whole career, like the whole 10 years that I was at Number Fire FanDuel, my thought process was always that I was going to eventually just kind of go out on my own and do my own thing. It's just always been what I've wanted. I really value, you know, having that freedom of no oversight and just doing my own thing and ownership. It's really, really important to me. And it's not that FanDuel didn't give me the ability to sort of do some of the things that I want to do. I mean, I started the Late Round podcast with FanDuel and such, but it's more so just like, you know, anything that you create, you know, you want to have that complete ownership of, and you want to be able to sort of dictate everything that you're doing. And for me, fantasy football, I'm just so passionate about it that I wanted to go down that route of really having that ownership. And so, you know, leaving was tough because I love the people that I was working with. I mean, folks probably know like Jim Stonis, Brandon Gadula, some of the analysts that are at Number Fire still, and at FanDuel, 2 of the greatest human beings you will ever meet. And they were working for me for years, and I miss that for sure. And I knew I was going to miss that. But what's been really positive about the experience is not just so much the fact that I've been able to, you know, sustain a living and not have to worry about that as much as a lot of people have to worry about, you know, going out on their own and such, because I'd built the audience already and I had that backbone. But it's just been like the connections that I've made, you know, like last week I went to lunch with a couple of people in the Late Round Fantasy Football Discord. Like we just got that are here local in Charlotte, and we got lunch and hung out, and just like that kind of stuff is way, way more important to me than being on television or doing those things. And it's sort of just the realization of like, what do you want out of whatever you're doing? And I had years of sort of testing different things. Like I went on TV, I did radio, I did this, I did that. And I knew what I liked and didn't like. I knew that I was not the typical, like, I'm not like a mainstream, put me in front of a camera kind of person. It's just not what I enjoy. What I enjoy is shows like this, or going, doing live streams, doing podcasts, and really having that more relaxed atmosphere where I can really dig deep into these different topics, as opposed to doing a radio hit or something for 5 minutes where I can't really dig into why my prospect model likes Isaiah Pacheco, And so that's really been the most rewarding piece of all of this, is I'm now able to just do the things that I really truly love to do. And I'm making connections that I never thought that I would be able to make.
That's awesome. That's awesome. So in the words of JJ Zachariason, what is late round fantasy football? What's it all about?
Yeah, I'd say, it's a data-driven analytical approach to fantasy football. And it's, you can get in a lot of different ways. It doesn't have to be a pay-for model. I know that not everyone can afford to spend money on fantasy football. So I have the Late Round podcast where you can get bite-sized episodes and my analytically driven stuff. I think that there's not enough strategy-related thinking and game theory thinking with fantasy football still to this day. And so I really try to focus a lot of my attention on that, not just like take this guy, pick this player. I like this guy, I don't like this guy. That's still part of it, but understanding the game theory, understanding those aspects of things as a baseline is really helpful for you to win year over year. So it's really an analytical approach to help you sustain victory, right? So I have these guides. The business model is very simple. It's literally just my podcast, which helps me from a marketing standpoint. I have a newsletter as well that's free for anyone to subscribe to, and I try to get basically an article out to people every week. And then I have my guides. I have a prospect guide, which is about prospects. Then I have a draft guide, which is for season-long drafts, and then a Patreon where I post rankings and such. It's really that simple. So you can kind of pick and choose what you like and what you don't like and what you want and what you can afford. That's really, I want it to be a spot where people aren't intimidated to learn more about this game and to dig deeper into the analytics and such.
That's awesome. Yeah, it's such an incredible resource. I mean, each component that you put out there is so content based, just such great information. And again, you communicate so well, whether it's, via the podcast or via your, the guides, outstanding product for sure. So with, fantasy football resources, different things out there, are there different sites that you use, like as a consumer, or sites that you use to help you collect data that, gets driven into your process? Or are there sites and resources out there that really are complementary to late round fantasy football that you'd recommend to people out there?
Yeah, I think that, if there were a site that's complementary or sites that are complementary, I think that it would be like a place where you can get editorial more so. Because I've really changed my approach to what I'm doing to, instead of, an article every day or, which I would be doing I started, at lateroundqb.com as a blogger at my own site. And then Numberfire, I was just pumping out content constantly. And then with FanDuel, still pumping out content constantly. I've really shifted my focus to not be as editorial and all my written stuff. Yeah, I have my newsletter, but it's really informal. And then, I have my draft guides and stuff, or my draft guide and my prospect guide, which is, they're behemoths. I mean, these are projects that I'm working on. So it's really not, there's not as much editorial on my end anymore, which I love. It's nice to not have to feel so forced. They're feeling so forced to get that out in that way. So I think like an Establish the Run is a really good compliment to the kind of thing that I do, because they do a lot of the editorial stuff. They're doing the same type of interesting research and such, but it's just from a different angle, different perspective. And I'm much more season long focused than them. They're a lot, you can get a lot of DFS and betting stuff with them. So I think that from a compliment standpoint, that makes the most sense. From a resource standpoint though, obviously I'm data heavy and I care about data. And so, StatHead is a great site for folks to get introduced to some of this data. You can query a lot of interesting things. Numberfire is still a place where you can get really good information and expected points related things for football. Fantasy data is a really good spot to get the basic information. And they now have advanced stats there too. And then PFF, I mean, PFF is now approachable in terms of being able to afford it for the average Joe. It wasn't always like that a handful of years ago. And now you can go in there and find basically the majority of the things you would want to find, slot rate, different quarterback metrics, etc. And so those are some of the more data and stat heavy resources that I end up using.
That's awesome, man. Great recommendations for sure. So you do a lot of different research studies, every year, that help drive what you do. What are some of the most eye-opening things that you've discovered, for the quarterback position or running back position or wide receiver position? I know that there's so much that goes into your projections and your models, but what are some of the things that have been most revealing to you that you've discovered where it was like an aha moment?
Yeah, I think that anything eye-opening is it's when I am able to do studies that sort of go against conventional wisdom, right? Or the results show something that goes against conventional wisdom. I remember, back in the day when I was the editor-in-chief at Numberfire, we used to do real football articles, not just fantasy football and betting content, all that. We would analyze real football, actual football through data, right? And one of the articles I wrote was that the Tony Romo narrative was garbage. And I dug into it and I realized that, back in the day, everyone's like, oh, Tony Romo's this choker, et cetera, et cetera. And then I realized after doing some analysis that Romo was actually not a choker. He was actually one of the best fourth quarter clutch quarterbacks that we've ever seen. So it's sort of that type of approach that I like to take, where if I can discover something that goes against the grain and conventional wisdom, it's usually a pretty big win. So, obviously the late round quarterback ebook was big for me. That's what got my career going and started back in 2012 when, everyone was drafting quarterbacks early. And I said, oh, wait a minute, there's a lot of data that suggests you shouldn't be doing this. So that was really big. But I think since then, some of the ones that pop into my mind, I mean, I did a study earlier this week on mobile quarterbacks and quarterback mobility, and basically showing that if a quarterback is mobile and runs the ball a lot, it's not a good thing for any of the positions on his team. That includes running back. I think that there's an idea out there that a mobile quarterback opens up more holes for these running backs. They're more efficient, and that might be the case. But from a fantasy points scored standpoint, it's actually a detriment because the quarterback is just taking on more of those fantasy points and more of that scoring for himself. That's really what it comes down to. So that's one of them. And I think another one over the last few years, has been sort of how rookies are really undervalued in redraft leagues. I think that people get scared away. They shy away from them because of the ambiguity of them and the unknown. But rookies are very, very good bets in your season-long league, generally speaking. So you should be targeting them.
Yeah, that's good. No, that's good. That does lead into this next question. So when it comes to you, the way that when you're playing fantasy football and you're constructing a roster, are there certain principles that you lead in with every time you're entering a league? Again, it could be avoiding players around a running quarterback or certain principles like obviously volume, aggression, that kind of stuff.
Yeah, look, the running back dead zone is very real. I know that every single year there are people out there. But this year is going to be different. The running backs in the dead zone this year, they're actually pretty good. So maybe we should. Every single year this happens. And generally speaking, if you are fading the running back dead zone and you know how to fade them, I talk about this in my draft guide a lot, where every ADP source is going to be different. So like if you're playing an underdog or something right now, you're playing in a best ball league, it's going to be sharper ADP. The running back dead zone is going to look a little bit different than what it looks like in your typical home league. And I'm catering more to the people who are playing in their home league or maybe a semi-high stakes league and not necessarily a best ball league like that. And so you should definitely pay attention to the running back dead zone, and I do in all my drafts. And I've basically, obviously scoring and team structure matters to a decent degree here, but hero RB, anchor RB, whatever you want to call it, the research screams that's the best approach. All the research that I've done screams that you should get a running back in the first 2 rounds, use that running back as your anchor, hope that he ends up panning out and doesn't get hurt, and then wait until like round 7, 8, maybe 6 to get that RB2 and sort of build your running back library after that. And then in the meantime, maybe get an elite tight end and then maybe get a quarterback. Don't get both, but get one of those 2 onesie positions maybe, or just pound wide receiver and go that route. That's generally the way that I'm approaching the vast majority of my fantasy drafts. Is I'm getting a running back as my anchor, I'm going wide receiver heavy, and then I'm getting a running back again once I hit like the 7th or 8th round.
I love it. I love it. So when it comes to the fantasy football league experience, what are some of your recommendations or your opinion on like what are the best ways to provoke league engagement, maximize engagement, so your league is having a good time?
Yeah, look, I commish a couple dynasty leagues. I have my redraft league that I commish. It's technically a keeper league, but it's typical redraft league. And I obviously play in tons of them. And some of them are online, some of them are local, all that good stuff. I think that the most important thing that I found is to have active chats whether it's GroupMe, whether it's Slack, using some sort of platform for people to be able to engage and talk to consistently. I found that it's better to have those sorts of platforms as opposed to like Twitter DMs for whatever reason. But yeah, I mean, having active chats is very, very important. I think as a commissioner, back in the day, this is really how I really got started. But back in the day, before all of this, I would write like league notes and stuff and like have stupid storylines and stuff like that and have power rankings for every team. And the league would look forward to those things coming out every single week. And it was just fun. It made it a lot more fun. You create and you generate these rivalries out of nowhere for no good reason, but it's hilarious. And, people just get more, just get more engaged that way. And I really, I think that people assume that the more money that's at stake, the more engaged people will be. And I found that's not really the case. Obviously if you're playing in a very, very high stakes league, that would be the case. But if you're playing even in a $20 entry versus a $200 entry, the engagement doesn't necessarily change. It's all about the people that you're including. So I think it's important to vet the folks that are joining and making sure that they want to be doing this and that they want, to be a part of this because you see it being something that people are going to engage with.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with that more. I mean, that is spot on. I think that leagues that are fun and engaged, doesn't really matter what the buy-in is. It's the pride. It's the ability to trash talk with people that are having fun time trash talking back to you, right? And I love it. I love it. So there are other ways to make leagues more fun. Obviously, like last place punishment. Are there certain punishments that you've seen over the years that you think are the best or the funniest or the most outrageous?
Yeah, I mean, I think the typical like SAT punishment's pretty funny, and like obviously the Waffle House challenge is always good. But the one this year, this offseason, where the dude had to do like a dance every day on like TikTok and stuff, and then he ended up going viral, and like he was on the Today Show and stuff for it. That's the kind of stuff that I think is great because it's super creative. And now we're in this world where, especially like on TikTok, where it's very easy to grab or to get a lot of at least views and eyeballs, to force people to do something that's completely PG and completely fun and lighthearted. But getting someone to, especially we live in this like social media driven world, to force them to generate likes or generate something is hilarious to me because they're going to have to do something that they probably otherwise wouldn't be doing because the vast majority of people playing fantasy football are not people that are public and, whether it's an analyst in the space or whether it's a reporter, a news anchor, what have you, they're not public figures. And then, they go out there, they have to do something like that. I think it's hilarious. So I would say something like that, to whether it's like them dancing or having to like sing the same song over and over and over again every single day until one of the videos gets like 100 likes or something like that.
Yeah.
Like that kind of thing is pretty funny to me.
That's good. That's good. How about creative ways to set your fantasy football draft order? Are there certain things that you've liked or seen over the years that appeal to you?
I really like whenever you can get people involved in like other sports that you wouldn't otherwise be involved with. So for instance, like a NASCAR race or something, if you're in a league where folks don't watch NASCAR, but you all have to draw a certain driver and then that's your draft, however they finish is essentially your draft order. I think that's really fun. You can do that with golf too. If people aren't really like super into golf, or even if they are, it's not that big of a deal, and just go by who finishes best, of that group. I actually in my dynasty leagues that I commish, I ended up buying it's very cheap. You can go on Amazon and buy it for like $20. I should probably have like an affiliate link for this, but there's a little bingo thing that you can buy with little balls. And I literally bought one of those, and then I numbered all the balls to have a weighted draft lottery for the teams that got first or last to sixth to last to be thrown into the lottery. And then that way tanking doesn't matter as much. I mean, you can definitely change the weight that you get within that lottery, but there's, every year then we have lottery day and people get on a Zoom because we're all around the country. People get on a Zoom and I'm just drawing balls, and my daughter was with me this past year with one of them and she was able to do it. So it's like a fun little thing to get people excited because then your draft order can change based on how the lottery goes down.
Yeah, that's great. I love the bingo ball lottery. That's a fun way to do it for sure. So what are some of your fondest memories looking back all these years you've played fantasy football with your league mates? And when it comes to like live drafts and experiences you guys have had?
Man, so obviously, it's great to just get together with everyone and be able to like every year, my home league, my brother who lives a couple hours away will drive in and we'll have a day of golf with a couple other locals who are in the league and such. And then we, a lot of us are all over the country now because they're all my high school buddies because I started back in 2002. And so, we'll make a day of it. And that's always, it's like Christmas, right? Like it's just a really, really great experience. So, we'll be able to, we got our booze, of course, cause that's usually necessary. People will want some beer and some, for me, some White Claws, and we'll have a good spread. And then we'll just be drafting and talking junk to one another on our Hangout or our Zoom.
Yeah, I love it. That's the kind of stuff that gets people connected and keeps people connected. So one of the best things I love about fantasy football for sure. So we're going to dive into some rapid fire, no limits questions. I'm going to throw out a question or a word. Just give me their first response that comes to your mind. So what do you love most about fantasy football?
The connections that you make with people. I don't know how rapid fire you want it to be, but I think it's important. Obviously like the competitiveness of it. And I think as an analyst, it's a little bit different. As an analyst, I like the being able to dig into these different things and make people think about fantasy football in a different way and this game that we all love and, be able to just open people's minds up to just viewing things differently. So an analyst perspective is a little bit different, but from a player perspective, I love the fact that there are people that I play with, that I don't necessarily talk to a ton out of football season, but I'm able to catch up with them during football season. Whereas if we didn't have the league, I don't know if that connection would necessarily be there as consistent, as constant. I think the connections are the number one thing.
Yeah, that's what it's all about for sure. So next one, on a scale from 0 to 10, how much does it annoy you when people mispronounce your name?
Honestly, I'm over it. It's only really when like Zachariason is easily the number one way. Like I hear Zachariason way more than I hear Zachariason. So like that's, if someone says Zachariason, no big deal. It's more so when like it's just like completely butchered, like they're not even trying. That it's maybe a little bit frustrating. But yeah, look, it's a tough last name. I understand.
I love it. So, okay, trolls. You have a very transparent process when it comes to you talking about your process and expectations. There are trolls out there that might misrepresent or misunderstand your process for like making an excuse for something that didn't go as expected. What do you think of those?
Yeah, so troll. I don't get nearly as many trolls as others do in the space, and I think it's because I don't approach things in a way that I think I know everything, about this stuff. And I'm not saying that others necessarily are, but I'm not as declarative about, you need to be drafting this player because there's just a lot of variance involved with this stuff. And I'm also, I think more importantly, I'm trying to show my work as to why I think the way that I feel. And so, from a trolling perspective, people will come at me. Sure. You can go on any social media platform and see someone saying something negative about me, but it's really not the worst thing in the world. The thing that gets me more is if I'm wrong, if I got something wrong, if I said, hey, last year, for instance, like I wasn't very high on Josh Jacobs. I just got Josh Jacobs wrong last year. Right. If someone wants to make fun of me and troll me for that. All right. I kind of deserve it. I got it wrong. Right. It's more so when I didn't get something wrong. And then what I said on a show or something is misinterpreted. And then they're saying things that are just not true about how I approach things, my feelings about something like that. That's way more frustrating than when a troll actually calls me out for getting something wrong, because I did get something wrong. Right. And so that to me is the more frustrating thing, but it just comes with what you do. It's all good. There's going to be people that like me, that don't like me. And I want, I'm human. I want everyone to like me. It's just the way that it is. I'm not one of those people that's just like, oh, screw the haters. No, I care. Like I want to know that feedback. I talk about this a lot, but I am looking myself up on Reddit not like every day, but maybe like once a month, once a week or something like that, to just see, because it's unfiltered feedback. When you go on Twitter and someone is saying something about you on Twitter, they're usually adding you and they're trying to get some sort of response from you in that way. Cause they're letting you know that, oh, I'm going to be in your mentions and I'm going to say something mean or I'm going to give some sort of feedback. And so there's a reason for them doing that. Whereas on Reddit, they're not necessarily, I mean, I have a username that people know exists, but like they're not on there tagging me and putting me, they're literally just giving feedback. So there's a bunch of threads on there that are like, who are your favorite analysts? Who are your least favorite? What's your favorite podcast? What's your least favorite podcast? All that kind of stuff. To me, it's free feedback that I can then use and make my stuff better. I'll defend myself if there's something like egregious. Like someone said once that they had met me in Charlotte and I was rude to them or something. When I'm geez. Like, first off, it's not like I'm getting noticed every day of my life out in public. Second, there is a 0% chance that I was rude to someone. Like I just, I'm the least confrontational person on the planet. There's no chance that something. So like, of course I'm going to be like, when did this happen? Like, just let me know. And I can like see what I did. And of course they didn't respond and it just didn't go anywhere from there. But I mean, like, I think that like getting that feedback and seeing it from troll, like positive, negative, whatever, it's not as, you know, they always say, don't read the comments. And I agree with that to some degree, but you can also glean a lot of good things from getting that kind of feedback. And I've used a lot of that feedback to help the products that I've been pushing for the last X amount of years. So I still think it's helpful. You know, there's some people that are like, I don't like the Late Round podcast because JJ's voice is really annoying. It's like, okay, well, God gave me this voice, so I can't really change that. But, you know, if it's the way that I am talking about a certain player, et cetera, I'm all ears.
That's really cool. That's really cool that you would think to do that and create something positive out of it for sure. So next question, what is your proudest accomplishment?
My family for sure. But I mean, if we're talking about the space, the industry, all that kind of stuff, I think that the podcast, the Lay Round podcast has been my baby for sure within the space. Like it's really the thing that's allowed me to go from, you know, a 5 out of 10 to an 8 out of 10. What, you know, it gave me this big jump and this big leap in my reach and my ability to speak to people. And I think that's been the thing that I'm proudest of from like a product standpoint. But you know, outside of that, this, you know, I'm just a fantasy football analyst. This stuff is not important to me at the end of the day when compared to the bigger things in life, like family. So, I mean, family is easily the number one there, but from a work related perspective, I think it would be the podcast.
Good. Great answer. Obviously, most difficult challenge you've faced in your career thus far?
In my career, I would probably say, there was a time where when Number Fire was being purchased by FanDuel, where I didn't know if I was going to accept a position at FanDuel. I don't even think I've said this on a podcast before. But it was a changing time. I didn't necessarily know what was going. I mean, I was younger too, but I didn't necessarily know like how we were going to fit in and all this kind of stuff. And I was thinking about going elsewhere. And in hindsight, I'm like, thank God I did what I did, because FanDuel was awesome. It was great. They were great to me. They still are great to me. And it all worked out really, really well. But there was a time whenever that all happened where Number Fire was bought by FanDuel, and that acquisition happened. It was like 2015. And I remember it happened around when I got married. I got married in 2015. And in my honeymoon, I was literally thinking about that. Like I'd have conversations with my wife. It didn't like, don't get me wrong. It didn't like overtake the honeymoon. We had like a bad time or anything, but we would have conversations about like what my next step would be. And it was a 50-50 kind of deal where I didn't know if I was going to go that direction. But at the end of the day, definitely glad that I did.
Makes sense. So East Coast dads, what's that all about?
Yeah, man. Yeah, that's a fun one. So basically, I realized that I was always really, really tired now that I'm a father when these primetime games and whether it's football, basketball, what have you, these primetime games, they start at like 8:30 and then you're not in bed until past midnight, especially if they go into overtime. And so I realized, man, East Coast dads really have it tough. And so I started selling some hoodies and t-shirts with this East Coast Dads brand. You can see it at eastcoastdads.com. And all proceeds go to No Kid Hungry, the charity. And it's just a way of sort of signifying like, yeah, I'm an East Coast dad. Like I sleep 4 hours a night when there's a primetime game, because no matter what happens, no matter what time I go to bed, my kids are going to wake me up at the same time every morning, and I'm not going to be able to get that shut eye that I need. So East Coast dads has just been a thing that's been around now that I would tweet out and stuff. Whenever like games would go into overtime, like, oh, this is bad for East Coast dads, or when games are going quick, oh, this is a really good night for East Coast dads. Just sort of became its own thing.
I love it. I love it. So next up, how much has your family support meant to you in this journey of yours?
Yeah, I mean, it's been everything. My wife's been incredibly supportive, never once questioned a thing that I was doing, which I think a lot of significant others would probably question. But she believed in me the entire way. Like, it was just not even a question in her mind that I would be successful one day in doing this, which I mean, when I started all this in 2012, I did not ever dream of me being in the position that I am right now, where I have people that I can speak to and speak with and connect with and talk to about this game and all of that. But she knew from that point that this was going to come to fruition, and I can't thank her enough for that. And so wife has been so supportive. My parents have been so supportive. They're not like, oh, we wasted a college education on stuff like that, where I mean, to be fair, I use a lot of what I have a marketing background and stuff, and that's huge in this space. And to be able to think a little bit differently about how you package your content and stuff is very, very, very important and really overlooked, I think. But my wife is my number one fan, and I'm her number one fan. So it's been, from that perspective, I feel very, very lucky.
Yeah, I'm sure your daughter's a big fan as well.
Yeah, it's one of those things where, like, she's going to be in kindergarten next year, and she'll go to school and, they'll be like, oh, what does your daddy do? And it's like, oh yeah, he's an accountant and he goes to work every day and he has to wear business casual. And then they're like, oh, what's your dad do? Oh, he does a podcast. That's all. That's what she thinks. Like, I just do a podcast. Like, that's my thing. And, it's one of those things where, like, it's just hilarious to me that, like, this can be my job, number one. But number two, she's going to grow up with a dad who wears backwards hats and gym shorts every day that just sits on a show and podcasts. And that's her norm. And that's great that it's her norm. I think there's going to obviously be more and more kids growing up with these parents that have unconventional jobs. But yeah, she I don't think she understands quite, like, what I'm doing. And I don't expect her to, like, love fantasy football or, like, be really into what I'm doing. But she likes to help out a little bit. Like, behind me, I have all these Funko Pops, and some of them, like, I have Elsa and Anna behind me. And that's all her. She wanted to get some Frozen action in there. So she loves it too.
I love it. I love it. So now, obviously, there's probably a lot of people that you admire in the industry, in the fantasy space. A lot of people that have probably influenced you quite a bit. If you had to name three right now, just off the top of your head, three people that you admire a ton in this space, who would that be?
So I think that the one misstep that people often take in any industry is thinking that someone who is successful before them, that you need to follow that exact path in order to be successful. But I think the opposite needs to happen. You need to see what they did right and see the things that you can take from them. Sure. But you need to create your own in order to really be a difference maker within whatever industry, whatever space you're doing, right? If you just do the same thing, then you're not going to be able to stand out. You're just going to be the lesser version of that person who already did that thing. So I think you got to give a shout out to Matthew Berry first, who, without him, and I've been fortunate enough to have grown a relationship with him, since doing all this. And, without him having paved that path within the space, we would not be having this conversation today. Like, realistically, I mean, he is the face of fantasy, and there will never be another Matthew Berry. There just will not be that. Right. So I think that he's been super influential for obvious reasons. I'm going to give a shout out, another one, to Sigmund Bloom. And the reason for that is because when I was starting out, he's a fellow. I grew up in Pittsburgh. He grew up in Pittsburgh. So he's a fellow Yinzer. So we had that connection with one another. But I remember distinctly, and he's a little bit older than me. He's like the father figure for some of us in the fantasy space, if you will. And I remember when I was starting out and I would get in those arguments that I was talking to you about, like on Twitter, he would be one of the people that I would argue with, that I would go back and forth with. And I then realized that when I approached my content, I needed to approach it in a way where, how would someone like Sig poke holes in the arguments that I'm making? And because of the way that he approached things then, and I don't think he's as aggressive in talking like that on Twitter anymore. It used to be like, the fantasy space on Twitter used to just be the Wild West with that kind of thing. Like people would just keep going back and forth. And again, the Rashad Jennings type conversations would go on for days. But someone like Bloom, I just respect so much because he does it in a way where he's not coming at you being rude. He's not coming at you being mean. He's genuinely interested in trying to make your and his process and understanding of something better. He's just a learner. That's the way that he is. And so it forced me with my analysis to always think like in the back of my head, okay, well, how would Bloom change this perspective? How would Bloom poke holes into this argument that I'm making? So that would be one. And then the last one, I'm just going to bucket two guys together because they're two of the best friends that I've made in the space, but Rich Rebar and Denny Carter. Denny, I do the Living the Stream podcast with. We've been doing that for about 9 years now. And it's just become sort of like this, it's like a cultish type show at this point where it's not even, we're not getting tons and tons of downloads. It's not, but we have this group of people that are the funniest, smartest. We have captured the greatest audience on the planet with that show. I kid you not. They are the best human beings on the planet that listen to that show. And without Denny is so witty, so funny, so much fun to talk to. And so doing that show is like talking to a brother, every week during the season. And then Rich Rebar, I've just gotten really, really tight with, and he's sort of my like sounding board with the analysis that I do. He's someone that if I have an idea, I bounce it off of him, vice versa. And we're able to just get better that way. So those would be, I know I cheated a little bit, but that would be my
No, that's perfect. No, that's perfect. So who in the fantasy football industry have you not had a chance to meet that you would really love to meet in person one day?
Man, in person, I feel like I've met a lot of people in person. A lot of it is more so like, I don't know if there's like a specific person that I haven't met IRL. It's more so the up and comers that I haven't been able, because like the pandemic hit, we were talking about this before we hit record, but like the pandemic hit and I haven't been to a conference since the pandemic hit for one reason or another. Like last year with the expo, I couldn't go because I had other things going on that weekend. And I haven't been to an FSGA because I'm not with FanDuel anymore. And so it's just been a little bit more difficult to get there. But I want to go to the expo. I'm hopefully going to go to the expo this year, going to FSGA next month. And it's more so just like meeting the people who are doing this newer work and fresh work that I haven't been able to come across and meet yet. I don't think there's anyone, like I've met most people that I would have, aspired to meet, if you will, if you were to talk to me 10 years ago,
Yeah. Well, I love that you bring up the expo because that was going to be the next question. Are you going to head to the expo this year? It's such an incredible event, like the way people come together, multi-days, just so much fun. So I think, I really hope that you can get out there because you'll have a blast. I mean, so many great people on every spectrum of the industry. It's definitely something I'd recommend. So, how about any advice for people that are looking to get into the industry? So there's certain, key principles, key tips that you would provide for people that are looking to get more involved in the fantasy industry?
Yeah, one of the things when Mike Tagliere passed away, of COVID a couple years ago, I guess like a year and a half ago, I was friends with Tags, knew him, and I met him at a conference, and we stayed in touch and such, and would always update. Have family updates, that kind of thing. Unbelievable person. And the one thing that I learned from him, and I wrote about this a little bit after he passed, was, I get people messaging me, and I worked with a lot of up and coming like writers or aspiring writers when I was at Numberfire because I was managing a massive team of freelancers and stuff. And I would give advice for years. I mean, that's just what I was doing. I was helping them out and hopefully making them better content creators. And so the one thing that Tags that really always stood out with me with Tags is just the enthusiasm for just having a seat at the table, right? Like just being grateful to just be there. No one else on the planet felt the way that he did about just being able to do this for a living and be grateful for it. And so that's the one perspective that I definitely try to hold on to most day to day, is not to lose sight of the fact that I am doing something inconsequential in the grand scheme of things. I'm not a doctor. I'm not a lawyer, what have you. It's a very, very, I'm just an escape for people, really. And I'm so lucky to be doing that. And I think that passing that on and that enthusiasm on to others allows them to know that if they are making money doing this, making decent enough wage to be able to live off of all that kind of stuff, to feel grateful to be able to do that, that you're not going to start making tons and tons of money right away. And that's not abnormal. Of course, everyone, I want everyone that's doing work to get paid tons of money. But I'm just the idea of being grateful is just very, very important. I think it drives people, right? So that's one thing. The other thing that I think goes, it's just an oversight for so many folks in the space. And this is the number one piece of advice that I give anyone is differentiation, right? Find ways to stand out. And it's so obvious. It's such an obvious piece of advice, but instead of sitting there and saying, I'm going to create team previews for every team, or I'm going to do talk about rankings everyone does that. Everyone's doing that thing. And the time that you spend on doing that thing, you're then not spending that time doing something else that could be very, very impactful, even if it's just one piece of content. I mean, look across the space at the people who have really, really done well over the last handful of years and, have grown their audience, etc. Especially if they're not connected to a big media brand to help sort of boost them up a little bit, like a Matt Harmon, Reception Perception, Silva, and what he does with the matchups column, right? That's the reason why Silva got to where he is today. Rich Rebar with the worksheet, right? There's always these one things this one piece of content that's helping people to be different and showing people that they can be different. And you can even take like what I did with the Late Round podcast, the podcast itself and the content. Yeah, I hope that the content is different than what you can get elsewhere. I really, really hope. But at the same time, I'm also differentiating it because when I started the show back in 2017, I looked at the fantasy landscape. Every single show, every podcast, there's nothing wrong with this, but every podcast was an hour long. And I said to myself, what if I did shorter shows that were like TED Talks, right? As opposed to having the conversations that other people have and that kind of thing. And that would be a way to differentiate what I'm doing. And I think that if you look at the feedback that I get for the podcast, the number one piece of feedback, even you mentioned at the start of the show, is I love that you get these bite-sized episodes. You get these shorter episodes where you're just jam-packed with information and you can get it all in your commute. If you have a 15-minute commute, you can listen to an entire episode of the Late Round podcast. And so, I'm not saying that like I have all the answers. I'm just saying that there are ways to differentiate literally everything that you're doing in a way where you can then help yourself stand out a little bit more because it's a pretty saturated market overall.
Yeah, no, that's very, very well said. I love those. That advice is extremely valuable to anyone who's listening and who wants to get more involved in the industry for sure. Now, is there anything that we have not covered that you'd like to share with the listeners?
I don't think so, man. I mean, again, I'm grateful that you would want to talk to me about this kind of stuff, and I hope that the one thing with my show in that it is so quick hitting and it's very, very, there's no fluff to it or anything like that, is that I don't always get to share me, and not everyone. It's funny because like people will listen to the Late Round podcast and they think one thing of me, and then they turn on Living the Stream and they're like, oh, that's the kind of person that JJ is now. And so like it's fun that I have that dichotomy, but more people listen to the Late Round podcast and they do Living the Stream. And so it's just one of those things where I want people to get to know me and not make assumptions based on the analysis I do, the work that I do, any of that kind of stuff. I would love to have drinks, lunch, whatever with everyone. It's just the kind of person that I am. Like I said, last week I got lunch with a couple of patrons and Discord members. Just that kind of thing. That those connections and those conversations mean way, way more to me than me getting Josh Jacobs wrong or right in a fantasy season.
That's awesome. That's wonderful. Absolute pleasure having you on. I think that, what you do is truly valuable. I hear you sometimes, kind of say, wow, it's not important. It is important. I think that, with fantasy football, you've nailed it when you talk about some of the foundational aspects of the game, why we love it. It's that league experience and the connections that are formed and the relationships that get built with fantasy. So by you inspiring people to dive deeper into fantasy, fall more in love with fantasy, you're creating better leagues out there, which means more connected people that are getting getting the connections they need. I mean, in this world today, I mean, I think that's a big thing that's missing, right? People that aren't able to have relationships with people, get more depth with people. Some of my favorite things with fantasy are what you see in a league that just completely falls outside of the league. I've seen relationships built, in fantasy leagues where it has nothing to do with fantasy, and these people are connected, and it improves their lives. And so what you do, you build more love and passion for fantasy, and I think that infiltrates leagues and makes leagues better. So I love it. I appreciate you very, very much. Love your podcast. Love everything you're doing. And if you need to get more fantasy content in your life, you want to make sure that you're following at Late Round QB, JJ Zachariason, one of the best there is in the business. So make sure you're following him, and we'll end here.
Thanks, man. I appreciate it.
Absolutely.
Thank you for listening to the Fantasy Football Unlimited podcast. Until next time, be sure to follow and subscribe to all of FFU's social media accounts for daily content.